I still remember that day like it was yesterday. No rain, no thunder. Just a normal Monday morning. The Texas sky was a light gray. The sun hadn't quite broken through. And inside me, there was just a strange emptiness. I walked into the office building where I'd worked for 15 years, black coffee in hand like always, never thinking that in just a few hours, my life would change course forever. The third-floor conference room was the same as always. Clear glass walls, a long oak table, and a row of gleaming black leather chairs neatly lined up. Clay Vincent was already sitting at the head of the table, laptop open, one hand flipping through documents, the other clicking a pen repeatedly, a habit I'd grown accustomed to since he appeared. Clay wasn't the type to pull out a knife and stab you. He was the type to say, "We appreciate you," while his hand was cutting away your lifeline on paper. I sat down across from him, setting my coffee aside. The room smelled like a tech store, cold, clean, impersonal. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid shutting. Clay looked up, his gray eyes devoid of expression, and got straight to the point without preamble. "Nathan, I'll cut to the chase," he said, pushing a stack of papers towards me. "The company has decided to adjust the compensation package for senior positions. Specifically, your base salary will be reduced by 40%. The commission structure will also be redesigned to reflect performance in a more modern way." I didn't immediately open the papers. I just looked at him. He continued as if reading a weather report. "We believe this change will encourage flexibility and align with current industry standards." I still said nothing. The question in my head wasn't why, but is this how they operate now? A company I helped build from a temporary office on 6th Street, now brushing me aside like lint off a suit jacket. "Is there a timeline for this?" I asked, my voice as light as if asking for movie showtimes. Clay smiled, but the smile was colder than the air conditioning in the room. "Effective immediately," he said, then nodded as if it were a victory. I nodded back, opened the file, glanced over the numbers. 40% was real. The new commission structure made reaching my previous income level nearly impossible unless I turned into Superman. And the benefits? Cut, of course. I closed the file, stood up, and extended my hand. "Thanks for being clear," I said. Clay flinched slightly. I guessed he'd prepared for negotiation or anger. Maybe he hoped to see me plead, or at least frown in protest. But I just stood there, looking him straight in the eye, hand outstretched like a man saying goodbye to a partnership that had run its course. He shook my hand a little awkwardly, then sat back down, still looking confused. I walked out without looking back. The glass door closed behind me, the click softer this time, but inside me, something shattered without making a sound. I went back to my office, took down the picture of my 2 daughters on their college graduation day, a photo I always kept right on my desk as a reminder. I do this for family. I also took the fountain pen a client gave me, the watch commemorating my 10th year of work, and a small wooden plaque engraved with the old founder's quote, "Nothing is more valuable than trust." Just 3 items. I placed them in a small box. No one said anything as I walked past the work area. A few pairs of eyes followed me, silently. Thomas, the CFO, approached, giving me a look full of unspoken words. He was the last of the old guard left here. His eyes spoke for his lips. "I know this isn't about money. It's because they want you out." I nodded slightly, gently patting Thomas on the shoulder. Neither of us needed to say more. While I got to the parking lot, a light breeze had picked up, swirling leaves in the newly emerged sunlight. I opened the trunk, placed the box inside, then got into the driver's seat. Didn't slam the door, didn't yell. I just looked in the rearview mirror, adjusted it slightly. In it, I saw myself, still Nathan Ellis, but something was different today. Maybe it was loss. Maybe it was a beginning. On the drive home, I didn't play music. I needed to hear the sound of tires on the road, the wind whistling through the slightly open window, the slow beat of my own heart. I didn't know where the future would lead, but I knew one thing. They had just handed the relationships I'd spent 15 years building over to someone else. And that someone else could very well be me. Just somewhere else. When I opened the door to my house, my daughter was cooking dinner. She looked at me, her gaze slowing, then asked softly, "Dad, are you okay?" I smiled, but the kind of smile that makes your throat tighten a little. "I'm okay," I replied. But sitting down at the table, looking at the meal, hearing the clink of silverware, I knew my insides were churning. Not because of the pay cut, but because of the feeling of being crossed off a list without anyone blinking. And in that exact moment, I knew what I needed to do next. But not today. Today, I just needed to sit with my daughter, eat dinner like any other night, and hold on to one thing. True value, someday, speaks for itself. That night, after dinner with my daughter, I sat alone in my study. The small room at the end of the hall, soft yellow light casting shadows on the wall hung with old blueprints from projects I'd worked on. On the desk sat an oak desk clock, the second hand silently sweeping. Steady as the rhythm of life I had maintained for 15 years at the old company. I leaned back in my chair, holding a warm cup of tea, my eyes landing on a small framed photo in the corner of the desk. A picture from my first year at Brandon Lumberworks. My hair was still dark, white shirt sleeves rolled up, standing amidst a group of colleagues in front of a truck loaded with raw lumber. The look in my eyes then was eagerness. The earnest enthusiasm of a man who believed he had just found the right place to belong. Back then, Branton was just a mid-sized lumber supplier with revenues under $8 million a year. We worked in a dingy office with ceilings that leaked during rainy season and a printer that sounded like a generator. But there was something about that place that felt right. Maybe because I grew up around my father's wood shop, where I learned to distinguish oak from maple by touch, where the smell of sawdust mixed with my father's sweat was the smell of life. I remember my first interview day. I didn't wear a suit. I brought a simple resume, a hand tape measure, and a sample bid sheet I'd done for a small firm in Dallas. I sat across from the old owner, the founder of Branton, Hal Branton, a man with a deep voice and hands perpetually stained with paint and sawdust. After listening to me, he just said, "You don't sell lumber. You sell reliability. I need people like that." From that day, I began building the sales department the way my father used to build a table, detail by detail, joint by joint. I didn't use flashy techniques. I made phone calls. I visited construction sites. I sat with clients in small diners instead of fancy restaurants, just to understand their worries. A client once told me, "I like how you answer calls at 6 p.m. without sounding busy." I didn't think it was a big deal. To me, it was the bare minimum of decent work ethic. I also remember another time when a shipment was delayed due to flooding. I personally drove a sample batch to the site so they could start framing. They were surprised to see me, a guy in a white shirt, unloading lumber from a truck myself. But to me, keeping a promise was more important than keeping my clothes clean. Over the past 15 years, I don't think I did anything monumental. I just worked, didn't complain, didn't quit. My daughter once asked, "Dad, why do you never take sick days?" I laughed, ruffled her hair, and said, "Because I'm afraid a client will call and no one will answer." And so, year by year, sales gradually increased. From 8 million to 15, then 20. Last year, when I reviewed the end-of-quarter figures, total revenue hit 73 million. I personally handled over 12 million of that. No grand nameplates, no awards lining the walls. Just a solid belief. When you live authentically and do the right thing, results will follow. I put down the teacup, reached for the old employee badge still lying in the drawer. Plastic, the photo faded with time. But I kept it because it reminded me of the man I used to be, the one who believed this place was a second home, who never thought he'd be crossed off a list in a 10-minute meeting. And tonight, in the soft yellow light, I sat there for a long time. Not regretting, but remembering that I had lived fully for this job. 15 years without a single complaint. Not out of fear, not out of resignation, but because I thought if I didn't do it with all my heart, who would? Now I knew the answer. They didn't need someone working with heart anymore. They needed numbers, spreadsheets, polished reports. But I had no regrets, because what I had lived, the people I had served, wouldn't vanish just because someone found me too old. There's a kind of firing that doesn't use words. It doesn't come by calling you straight into the office and saying, "We have to let you go." It comes through small, repetitive actions, silent and cold like rainwater seeping through a roof, drop by drop, until everything rots without anyone noticing when it started. I began feeling those drops around the second month after Clay Vincent officially took the director's chair. Initially, it was emails I wasn't included on for feedback. New plans, campaigns, proposals for marketing, which previously always came to me for review, now went straight to the executive board. No one said anything. No one notified me. I only found out when an employee asked, "Boss, did you approve this yet?" And I had to pretend I knew what this was. Then came the budget. The entertainment budget, which I used to have discretion over for meetings with major clients, now required 3 levels of approval. I remember ordering lunch for an old client at a small Italian place in Austin, less than $100 total. The next day, accounting sent me an email. "Next time, please submit an expense request in advance for approval." I started feeling like a stranger in the very office I helped build from the ground up. Like someone had changed the locks without telling me. But the big blow didn't come from emails or budgets. It came from people. I discovered Clay was meeting directly with major clients, people I'd nurtured relationships with for over a decade, without informing me. At first, I thought it was coincidental, that he was just introducing himself. But when a client called asking about a new clause I'd never heard of, I started to understand. Someone was rebuilding the bridge I spent 15 years constructing. And this time, they didn't need me to cross it anymore. I said nothing, didn't send questioning emails. I just observed. Gabriel, an employee I'd only trained for 6 months, once eager to learn, always early and asking me about building client relationships. Now he was busier than me, assigned to manage new strategic accounts. I saw Clay and Gabriel having lunch together a few times at places I used to take clients. Once, I walked into a restaurant near the office for coffee and saw them sitting in a corner booth discussing something seriously. Gabriel met my eyes and looked down at his water glass, saying nothing. Clay just smiled, waved as if we'd bumped into each other in the park. That was the moment I knew for sure. I was no longer on the company's future map. No one fired me, but bit by bit, they were pulling the rug out from under me. A week later, I received a short meeting invite with Clay and the finance department to review the compensation structure. They spoke in gentle tones, as if helping me reorganize my life. I sat listening, hands resting on the wooden table, eyes looking out the window where the afternoon sun slanted across the glass. They talked about performance orientation, optimizing resources, innovating personnel structure. All beautiful words for pushing me out. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I drove through the old industrial park where the company had its office before moving to the shiny new building. The old building was now a warehouse, the faded sign still bearing the words, "Branton Lumber Works, bound by trust." I parked on the side of the road, turned off the engine, sat silently looking through the windshield. This place was where I laid the foundation. Now, the new people were erasing every trace I left behind. When I got home, the kitchen light was still on. My daughter was at the dining table, reading project documents. She looked up, asked, "Dad, have you eaten?" I shook my head, took off my jacket, then poured myself a glass of water. I didn't tell her what had just happened. I just sat down across from her, asked about her work, the new design, her colleagues. I didn't want to bring the hurt home. But my daughter looked at me for a long time before saying softly, "Dad, don't suffer alone." I didn't answer, just nodded. And inside, I wondered, why did the people I trusted silently chop down every branch I painstakingly grew? Why didn't they just say it straight, instead of pruning in silence? Until one day, I realized I was just a stump. But I also knew a strong stump can still sprout when the soil is right. And I started thinking, maybe it was time for me to choose different soil. Not for revenge, but to live again, my own way. That Friday night, I sat alone in my home office. Light rain was falling outside, the Texas spring kind, each drop pattering on the roof tiles, not violently, but enough to make the room feel quieter than usual. On the desk was a glass of bourbon, a desk lamp casting honey-colored light on old reports, and the phone silent for hours. I wasn't reading anything, just looking at familiar numbers, client names printed on paper, like rereading a diary of my life. It was the summary report from the previous quarter, the last one I completed before Clay started interfering deeply with the system. Every number was tied to a person. I knew everyone on the list well. I knew which shopping center they were building, which school their kids attended, what kind of countertop stone their wives preferred. Every contract I signed wasn't a revenue win, but the result of countless sincere conversations. Not the call once and done type, but calling 10 times if needed. Not asking, what do you need? But what are you dealing with? I poured a little more bourbon, took a small sip, and wondered how many people still remembered I used to do so much. Or did they now just see me as a burden with a compensation structure no longer suited for the times? The phone rang suddenly, pulling me from my drifting thoughts. The caller ID showed Mike Denton, purchasing director at Halcyon Builders, one of the largest accounts I'd ever managed. We'd worked together since their company was just a small contractor. Now, they operated in 7 states. I answered. Nathan here. Mike didn't say hello, didn't beat around the bush. Nathan, are you still working at Branton? I leaned back, looking up at the ceiling as if the question had just pierced it. I'm still here, temporarily, I replied, unable to hide the weariness in my voice. I just got a call from someone named Gabriel. He said he's the new guy handling the Halcyon account. Said he's going to review the discount policy and propose a tiered model mechanism. Nathan, I don't like that kind of talk. Silence. I heard the rain soften, leaving only Mike's heavy breathing on the other end. We have an ongoing contract. I don't need it restructured. I need materials delivered on time and someone I can call at 6 a.m. if something goes wrong. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. I understand, Mike. I replied, my voice steady as a calm lake. You're still there, but it sounds like they're planning to replace you. Is that right? That question cut straight through the last layer of defense I held. I didn't answer right away. My hand tightened slightly on the bourbon glass. I set it down to make sure I didn't drop it. No official announcement, I said, but I think I'm just a shadow now. Mike was silent for a long moment. Nathan, if you leave, call me before anyone else. I don't want to lose someone like you. I nodded, though I knew Mike couldn't see. A feeling welled up in my chest. Not exactly joy, not exactly sadness. More like validation. I ended the call, sat stunned for a moment, then opened my laptop. In the drafts folder, an unsent email still sat. Written 3 months ago, after I randomly met Daniel Harrison at a construction conference. Daniel was the VP at Garrison Supply, a competitor whose offer I declined because Branton felt like home. In the email, he wrote that if I had any intention of making a change in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. I stared at those words. For a very long time, I didn't send the email right away. I just hovered the cursor over it, then closed the window. I needed sleep. But as I turned off the lights and left the study, I felt something very clear. Clear as if someone had just flipped a switch in my head. I wasn't the one being replaced anymore. I was the one holding what they could never create with their new system. The next morning, I made coffee as usual. My daughter came downstairs, still sleepy, hair hastily tied back. Dad, you're up early, she said, sitting down at the dining table. I handed her a mug of hot cocoa, then sat across from her. Dad has a question, I said. She looked up. If you knew you were doing something well, but someone else said that way was outdated, what would you do? She frowned, thought for a moment, then answered, I'd do it my way, as long as it didn't hurt anyone. Because real results aren't about what other people say. I looked at her, saying nothing. But inside, I knew. This kid had just helped me confirm what Mike hinted at last night. I wouldn't beg anyone to keep me anymore. I wouldn't convince myself I had to endure. I was nearing the threshold of something new. And now, I just needed the courage to open the door. The following Monday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of a meeting, not for anything special. Just that something inside me had shifted since the call with Mike Denton. As if I knew I was about to say goodbye and wanted quiet time to prepare. I made coffee early, stood by the window, watching the first rays of sun hit the backyard. Sparrows still chirped outside the wooden fence, small sounds I usually ignored. But that morning, I heard every note. I wore a white shirt, gray pants, and tied a dark blue tie. Simple but proper, like I wore for my first interview at Branton. In the mirror, I saw a man who was no longer the version from 15 years ago, but also not someone beaten down. Just someone ready to close one chapter and open another, with his own hands and with a calmness forged over time. The office was still quiet in the morning. The receptionist greeted me like any other day, not noticing the difference in my eyes. I went up to the 3rd floor, opened my office door, sat down, and took a deep breath. Then I turned on the computer, opened a new file. Not a contract, not a report. A letter. I'm writing this with deep gratitude. I started that way. No bitterness. No blame. I thank the company for their trust over 15 years. Thank colleagues, clients, and even those who had once been my employees. I said I would be leaving in 2 weeks to ensure a smooth transition. I didn't need a farewell party. I didn't want hollow praise. I just wanted to leave cleanly, consistent with how I had lived and worked. After finishing, I attached the letter to an email, addressed to the board, HR, and a copy to Thomas, the only friend left in leadership I had truly trusted. I didn't hit send right away. I stood up, walked to the office window, looked down at the parking lot. The sun was climbing higher, shining on gleaming car roofs. People were still arriving, walking briskly, coffee cups in hand, eyes glued to phones. Life wouldn't stop because one person left. But I knew a few people would feel the gap when I was no longer there. I returned to my desk, hovered the cursor over the send button, looked at it for a few more seconds, then clicked. No fireworks, no background music, just a small whoosh, the sound signaling the email was sent. And in that moment, I felt lighter. Not because I had given up, but because I had chosen. And that choice was mine. About 20 minutes later, Thomas stopped by. He didn't say much. Just came in, closed the door, and sat in the chair opposite me. "You did the right thing," he said after a moment of silence. I nodded. "It's not easy leaving after all these years," I replied, my eyes still on the stack of documents on my desk. "Not easy, but you left at the right time, before you stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror each morning." We said nothing more, just sat there, two men no longer young, understanding that some farewells need to be kept quiet to avoid hurting each other. That afternoon, I sent a farewell email to my old team. Not long, just a few lines. I always believed work isn't just about numbers, but about people. Thank you for walking alongside me. I will continue building value somewhere else where trust still matters. A few replied. A few called. Some asked where I was going. Some just said, "Boss, you were the last one who made me believe in the old way of doing things." I didn't reply to everyone. I just said thank you, then shut down my computer. In the afternoon, I packed my things. Not much. A photo with my 2 daughters, a small wooden trophy inscribed Salesperson of the Year, the first year I won it, and a worn silver fountain pen engraved with the old company name. I put everything into the familiar cardboard box, not too big, just enough to carry comfortably in both hands. When I walked out of the office for the last time, the hallway was still quiet. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt enough. I had given this place the best I had. And now I was ready to give that somewhere else. Before leaving the building, I stopped by the elevator down to the lobby. A new receptionist looked at me, nodded slightly. I smiled, then walked straight out to the parking lot. The afternoon sun filled the sky, casting golden orange streaks on the car windshield, as if everything was brightening again. I placed the box in the trunk, then got into the driver's seat. Before starting the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. In the reflection wasn't a loser. It was a man who had just chosen himself again. That evening, when I got home, my daughter had dinner ready. She had set the table, placed a small sprig of lavender next to my plate. "I thought Dad could use a little calming purple," she said, sitting down beside me. I looked at the plate, then at her, and said slowly, "Dad just left the company." She didn't ask why, didn't panic. Just looked at me for a moment, then smiled gently. I figured. Dad seemed different. Lighter. I nodded, and for the first time in months, I finished my entire dinner without stopping halfway. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but I knew from that moment on, I would no longer live in endurance. I would live with my own dignity. And that itself was the first foundation for whatever I built next. 3 days after I officially resigned, the phone started ringing. The first call came from Harold Lang, operations director at Northbridge Construction, one of the oldest clients I had ever handled. I clearly remembered his hoarse laugh during lunches at construction sites, the way he told stories like a father sharing life lessons with his son. When I answered, he didn't ask, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" He just said bluntly, "Nathan, I was just asked to sign a new contract with a 12% price increase." And nobody explained why. I wasn't surprised. I just sighed, and let me guess, I said, "No call from me, right?" Harold laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Nope. Some young woman named Gabrielle. Voice younger than the first spring rain." She told me your company is restructuring sustainable value strategies. Can you believe that? I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, feeling both bitter and clear-headed. I'm not at Brandon anymore, Harold. But if you need someone to listen, I'm here. The silence on the other end lasted a few beats. Then Harold lowered his voice. So where are you now? I didn't answer immediately. I didn't want to seem hasty, nor did I want to be seen as poaching. I just said, I'm considering a few options. But wherever I go, I'll keep working the same way as before. Honestly, on time, and always picking up the phone when something happens. Harold said he'd wait, and if I had any news, he wanted to be the first to know. I hung up, feeling an undercurrent starting to spread in my chest. Not excitement, but a deep realization. The relationships I built over 15 years didn't dissolve with the company name. They followed me because I was the one who kept my word. The next morning, I received 2 more calls. One from Jennifer at Westerly Group, whom I'd helped navigate a contract dispute by flexibly adjusting delivery schedules. One from Mark at Redfield Development, who once said I was the only reason he chose Branton for the past 4 years. They all had the same question, phrased differently. You're gone. So what are we supposed to do now? I made no promises, offered no suggestions. I just listened. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. Clay and the newcomers didn't understand a fundamental truth. Clients don't buy products. They buy people. And they didn't buy me because I was smart. They bought me because they knew I wouldn't leave them stranded. 3 days later, I received an email from Thomas. No introduction, no emotion, just an attached file. I opened it. It was an analysis spreadsheet. The numbers I used to manage, the contracts I used to sign. And right beside them, the total revenue per account for the last 3 years. I stared at the final number at the bottom of the sheet. $17,300,000 annually, the total value from the clients I managed. This figure was higher than any estimate I'd ever been shown. I blinked, not out of surprise, but because for the first time, the truth was laid bare in black and white. Clay hadn't just pushed me out of my chair. They had pushed me out of the right to know how much value I truly brought. That night, I sat in my home office, printed out the analysis, and placed it next to my coffee cup. I read each line like reading an indictment. Not against Clay, but against my own naivete, that I would always be valued correctly if I just worked hard and kept quiet. I reopened Daniel's email from Garrison Supply. This time, I replied, Daniel, I'm ready to talk seriously about a role at Garrison. I think it's time I rebuilt what others took lightly. An hour later, he called back. His voice was still deep, still steady as the first time we met. Nathan, we don't need you to prove anything. We just need you to do exactly what you've done for the past 15 years. Build trust. We met that weekend in a small but cozy office in downtown Austin. No electronic boards, no receptionist waiting. Just 2 men drinking coffee, talking about people, not KPIs. Daniel handed me a straightforward contract. Position, Vice President of Business Development. Full authority to build a team. Salary wasn't what it was at Brandon before, but the autonomy was double. I didn't need much time to think. I signed, and in the moment I put the pen down, I felt I wasn't just starting a new job. I was reclaiming my own name. 3 days later, Harold called back. He said Gabrielle had called him 3 times, and each time started with, I hope we can continue the working spirit established when Mr. Ellis was in charge. Harold laughed heartily over the phone. I told her, you don't need to continue any spirit. I'll continue with the man who created it. I said nothing, just smiled. Softly, but deeply, and then the unstoppable began. 1 client called, then 2, then 5. Each call felt like a drop of water hitting a lake, creating endless ripples. They didn't ask what I could do for them. They just asked where I was and if they could come with me. I didn't ask anyone to follow, but they came because I had never let them down. And sometimes that alone is enough to make an entire system crumble. For the first time in months, I opened the city's construction site map, marking places Garrison had struggled to break into. I took a red pen and circled the names of those calling me back. And I knew this journey was just beginning. That morning, the Austin sky wore an ash-gray color, neither sunny nor rainy, as if the entire city was holding its breath for something about to happen. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Garrison was still quiet, Only the whirring sound of the coffee machine in the corner kitchen like a soft morning greeting. I sat down at my desk, checked my schedule, then received an email from reception. Someone named Clay Vincent is waiting in the lobby. No appointment. Asked if he can see you for 10 minutes. I read the line once. Then again, Clay. The name echoed like something old from a room I had locked long ago. But now the owner himself was knocking. And although I had prepared for this moment for a long time, when it actually arrived, I still felt my chest tighten slightly. I stood up, slowly walked down the hall, past the clear glass of the main lobby. Clay was standing there, wearing a dark gray suit, blue silk tie, but his face lacked its usual confidence. His eyes darted around as if trying to regain his former composure, but only revealed a flicker of unease behind the polite nod. I approached. Clay, Nathan. He extended his hand. I shook it lightly and quickly. I only have 15 minutes, I said, then gestured for him to follow me into a small meeting room off the hallway, furnished with a round table and 2 black leather chairs, light filtering dimly through the frosted window, enough to see each other clearly, but not bright enough to scrutinize emotions. Clay sat down first, adjusting his posture slightly as if sitting on a witness stand. I didn't interrupt. I let him begin. I'll get straight to the point, he said. We know that some clients have moved their business to Garrison, and it seems the majority of those were accounts you previously handled. I nodded slightly. So I've heard. He swallowed, then continued, his voice dropping a notch. We're not here to argue. It's just we're facing the risk of losing several more major contracts. And the board wants to find a solution before things get out of control. I looked him straight in the eye. What do you want from me? Clay looked around the room as if searching for the right words. But no words could hide the truth. Perhaps, if you agreed to maintain a certain distance from a few strategic accounts, call it a temporary suspension of cooperation. In exchange, we wouldn't pursue any legal action based on the old confidentiality clause. I laughed, softly, but it echoed clearly in the closed room, like a gentle tap against my dignity. Clay, I said, leaning forward slightly. I read that clause carefully before signing my resignation, and my lawyer confirmed it. I am bound regarding competing products for 6 months. I haven't sold any overlapping items. Those clients came to me because I am me, not because of which company I represent. Clay pressed his lips together. You're exploiting a loophole. No, I said, my voice low but firm. I am living precisely according to the terms you and your legal team wrote. Silence enveloped the room. Outside, someone's footsteps echoed down the hallway like the sound of time, cold and steady. Clay changed his tone. Nathan, we both know this could become unpleasant, but I think both sides could find common ground. An agreement, maybe a consulting fee, or a commitment to limit activity in certain regions. I'm here because I respect you, and because I believe there's still room to negotiate. I leaned back in my chair, took a deep breath. Then I spoke, not loudly, but each word as clear as a knock on the door late at night. Clay, when you called me outdated, you didn't just cut my salary. You withdrew all trust, all unspoken promises between people. And now, when those who trusted me continue to trust me, you call a problem. But I call a consequence. He didn't answer. His eyes looked down at the table, where his hand fiddled with a borrowed pen from the meeting room. I stood up. I think this conversation is over. Clay stood too, hesitated, then moved towards the door. As he opened it, I paused, watched him, then said one last thing without malice, without bitterness. I don't wish you failure, Clay. I just hope next time, if you plan to replace someone, make sure you understand what made that person irreplaceable. He didn't turn back. The door closed behind him, not with a slam, just a dry click, like the final period on a story that ended long ago, but which people had only just finished reading. And I stood there in an empty meeting room, feeling not victorious, but serene. Someone who pushed me out was now scrambling to find a way back. But I wasn't standing at the old crossroads anymore. I had moved on, and there was no reason to turn back. That afternoon, the Austin sky was unusually clear. Not a cloud in sight, the air mild and dry, as if everything was pausing to make room for some slow, deliberate moment. I had just returned from construction site, My shirt still lightly dusted with wood shavings on the sleeves, my shoes coated in a thin layer of reddish-brown soil. A normal, productive day, like many since I started fresh with Garrison. I had just walked into the office when my phone vibrated. It was a text message. The sender's email address wasn't unfamiliar, but not familiar enough that I expected it. Clay.Vincent@Branton-Group.com. The subject line was simple, old matters. I sat down, opened the email, and read, "Nathan, I'm writing this not to blame, nor to negotiate. It's just, sometimes, silence prolonged enough becomes heavier than any accusation. I was wrong in how I viewed you. I didn't see the value you brought to Branton until the numbers started walking away. And then, when I couldn't hide behind data to justify things, I was forced to look again at the person behind the results. You were the soul of the sales department. I didn't acknowledge that when I had the chance. And I think perhaps it's too late now. Regardless, I hope you understand. Your silence made me reconsider. Thank you for not turning this into a war. Thank you for pointing out what I wasn't perceptive enough to see." Clay. I sat there for a long time after reading it. The screen remained lit, the cursor blinking at the end of the email as if waiting for me to write something. But I wasn't in a hurry. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking the parking lot below. The setting sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, stretching the shapes of the cars like with grain patterns. I thought about the day I left. The feeling of closing the last cardboard box. The feeling when my daughter looked at me and said, "Dad, you look lighter." The feeling when I signed the first contract at Garrison with a belief that wasn't arrogance, but quiet confidence, like a carpenter knowing exactly where the final nail should go. And now, Clay was searching for something in the void. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just an admission to ease his conscience. Whatever the reason, I understood. It was no longer my problem. I returned to my desk, placed my hands on the keyboard, and wrote, "Clay, I received your message. Thank you for sending it. I understand that some things are only valued once lost, and some lessons only appear when we are humble enough to look back. I carry no resentment. I only carry what I believe is right, how to live, how to work, how to keep one's word. And fortunately, there's still people out there who need that. I don't need an apology. I don't need validation. I just hope that you, if there's a next time, will see others with the light you once overlooked with me. I wish you well in finding what you once tried to fill with numbers." Nathan. I hit send. A soft whoosh sounded like an exhaled breath. Then I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, letting the surrounding space drift by in silence. No reply notification chimed. No immediate response. And I didn't expect one, because what I needed most then wasn't victory. It was knowing I was no longer entangled in games I had chosen to leave. An hour later, still sitting in my office, there was a knock on the door. It was Elena, Garrison's new operations manager. She handed me a thick white envelope, saying it was from the legal department. I opened it. Inside was the 3-year contract just signed with Northbridge Construction, the largest contract Garrison had ever secured. I looked at Harold's signature at the bottom of the page. Familiar, strong handwriting. Then I looked up at Elena. "Do you know," I said slowly, "the only way to keep a client isn't by keeping the price down. It's by keeping your word." She nodded, smiled, and excused herself. I held the contract, placed it in the folder on the right side of my desk. On the left side was the old framed photo, me and my 2 daughters on our trip to the Grand Canyon years ago. A sun-bleached photo, but rich with affection. The day ended like any other ordinary day. No celebration party, no speeches, just a message, a reply, and a man continuing on the path he had chosen, with silence, with decent work, and with the belief that some things of value don't need to be shouted to be seen. They just need to be lived right, and sometimes right is enough.